Very warm welcome, especially to those that are joining us for the first time. We hope you enjoy it. I'm Patricia Rumsey. I'm part of the Living Liturgy Forum, which is part of the Centre for Applied Theology. And the aim of the Centre is to make it possible for anyone who's interested in studying theology, but who might not have either the means or the time to do that formally, to offer them an opportunity for what our website has to offer online. So please do visit us at www.appliedtheology.org.uk and please sign up. Tonight is the third in our series, Women and Liturgy. In the first two conversations, we looked at the place of women in the liturgy from the viewpoint of history. What do the New Testament, what do the early church, what do they reveal? We saw quite conclusively that women were very much involved liturgically as deaconesses, and that they probably were presiders at the Eucharistic liturgy. Tonight, we bring our discussion into the world of today, and we ask, what might a deaconess look like in the 21st century? And why do so many women today feel marginalized, even ignored at the liturgy? What's gone wrong that they don't feel fully involved? And to discuss these questions, we have with us Professor Tina Beattie. Tina is Professor Emerita of Catholic Studies at the University of Roehampton and the Director of the Catherine of Siena College. She's a regular contributor to BBC Radio 4's Thought for the Day, and she also writes for The Tablet. She's the founder and facilitator of the Catholic Women Speak Network, and she's on the executive team of the Catholic Women's Council, which works on behalf of groups campaigning for recognition of full equality and dignity of women in the Catholic Church by greater inclusion at all levels. She's many academic publications, and in 2018 she published a novel, The Good Priest, and she has another novel in the pipeline. She was born into a Presbyterian family in Lusaka in Zambia. She's lived in other places in Africa. She's married to Dave, and they have 4 adult children and 4 grandchildren. To join with her in conversation, we have Dr. Patricia Kelly, who's the Honorary Research Fellow in the School of Divinity at the University of St Andrews. She specialises in ressourcement theology, French theology in the interwar period, and how theology responds to a changing world. She lives near York with her husband and 3 cats. We're not sure if they'll be joining us tonight, but the sharp-eyed among you will have noticed Sarah Park's cat, Sweet Pea, busy taking notes during our first session. So I think we're in for a very lively evening. Tina and Patricia, we're looking forward to this. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here, and we're doing a very informal conversation between us. We are both children born and baptized in the Presbyterian Church of Southern Africa, so how we came to be here talking about women in liturgy in the Roman Catholic Church at this point in history is probably a story for another time. But it's exciting for me to be part of a conversation where we've had really interesting input about historical perspectives on women deaconesses and women's roles in the early church. I find myself really fascinated by the suggestion that the sort of roles of ordination were mapped onto the functions of the Trinity. That requires much more food for thought than I've given it yet, but I think we're kind of leaping forward now, not even just to the present, but I guess to the future, because In the world of the post-COVID church, we're using the term new normal, and we have no idea what that will be, but we know for sure that the old normal is finished. And if the men in Rome don't know that yet, most of the women I know do know it. And we're ready and waiting to take up our roles in the church of the new normal. And if ever I needed persuading that this is a moment of opportunity, of crisis with a K, which is decision, judgment and transformation, it's the publication of the McCarrick report and the report into child sex abuse and abuse of vulnerable adults in England and Wales, both published recently, both devastating beyond the horrors of case histories and stories, terrible though these are, is the revelation, the exposure, if we needed it, of a profound dysfunction at the heart of the models of Catholic leadership and communication and accountability. So after the McCarrick report and the ICSA report, if there's no going back after COVID, there's no going back after those either. So it seems to me the question of the role of women in the Church of the Future is absolutely compellingly urgent and interesting now, and I'm really glad to be chatting with Patricia about it.
Tina, like you, I think it's hilarious. I mean, of all the women Patricia and Tom and James could have asked to speak, they chose the two with Scottish roots, born in Central Africa. I was born in Malawi, right next door to Zambia, and both baptized into the church, the Presbyterian Church of churches in Southern and Central Africa. And now here we are trying to discuss the role of women in the Catholic Church today and the future. I was born actually when I was a teenager or a small child, really, not a teenager, but when I was a small child and would have my hissy fits about you must have brought the wrong baby home. And my parents would always say, there's no chance of that because you were the only white baby born that month. I was born in a Medical Missionary of Mary hospital. Those of you who are familiar with the Medical Missionaries of Mary will know that they do sterling work, absolutely fantastic work, have done since they were founded. They're a congregation of nurses and obstetricians and gynecologists mainly, although their work now extends to AIDS, famine and other relief. They ran the hospital in the north of the country where I was born, and thousands of other babies like me, referred slightly unfortunately. Apparently we're all known as Rosemary's babies because the obstetrician was Sister Rosemary. It still makes me laugh, but if ever I meet a Medical Missionary of Mary, I say, oh yes, I know your order, I'm one of Rosemary's babies. It's probably the only time you can get away with saying that. But to me that reflects the work of a lot of women, of so many women, as we talked about, Tina, the other day when we were catching up about this. So many women in the church. It's quiet, it's unsung, it's heroic, and it's just not acknowledged anywhere. It's acknowledged very rarely in documents, very rarely in hierarchical pronouncements, and very rarely referred to actually in the liturgy, which is where most people come face to face with the institutional church. And we need to find a way of integrating those two things, I think.
And I think that exclusion of those who are the backbone of the church was so evident in the publication of Pope Francis's encyclical Fratelli Tutti, when we're told he's quoting St. Francis, and St. Francis said Fratelli Tutti, but it is so unacceptable at this point in history to publish an encyclical that refers to brothers all, that has its central organising idea as the idea of fraternity, and that in nearly 300 footnotes does not quote a single woman, theologian, biblical scholar or other source. And somehow, I think with humour and with goodwill and with a determination to stay in and struggle on, we have to make clear enough this won't do anymore. And, you know, talking about religious sisters, I've been reflecting a lot since reading the well, not reading the whole thing, but since looking at the 2 reports this week about the possibility of women's religious orders acting as models of leadership and self-transformation. Now, I don't want to romanticize anyone or anything, and I'm not idealizing things, but you know, any of us who work extensively with women's religious orders know that after the Second Vatican Council, they reinvented themselves. They are the custodians of the church's pastoral ministry. They are the custodians of the poor church, of the poor that Pope Francis wants, working often, I know, in partnership with priests and communities of religious brothers. But, you know, wherever you look, sisters are in the forefront of the hard work of social justice and pastoral care in the modern world. And I find myself more and more thinking, how do we take those models and use them as teaching aids, use them in the formation of priests and ordained ministries as alternative ways of being in and doing in the world? Related to that, I also find myself, as someone who's written about the theology of female priesthood for most of my academic career, which has been quite short, by the way. I left school at 15, stayed home with my 4 kids, came to live in England under duress from my English husband, and suddenly realised here I was kneeling in front of a washing machine as a brand new Catholic with 4 little children, thinking, what have I done with my life? And so I went to university, and there begins a story. I started university the year my youngest child started school. But for much of that time, I have looked at the relationship between sacramentality and the female body and female presence, a lot of it done around the figures of Mary and Eve. And while I believe theologically there is no convincing argument against the ordination of women, I'm also finding at the moment the whole, what would a deaconess look like? Well, for a start today, we would call them deacons because we no longer use that kind of gender distinction. But what would a female diaconate look like? What would a female priesthood look like? And I find myself thinking, actually, I want to ask those questions at a much more fundamental level at the moment. What should the diaconate and the priesthood look like in order to be fit for women to occupy? Because at the moment, I think the church has been shown to be so dysfunctional, and COVID is a tragedy and an opportunity to say we've stopped going to mass because we have an opportunity to be in dialogue. Pope Francis has wonderful wisdom when it comes to models for dialogue. Amoris Laetitia, 130 to 136, I think it is. And I think, why hasn't he used that model to make real all his rhetoric about the need to recognize women in the church? So I want dialogue. I want the men in the Vatican to meet with us openly, publicly, transparently, and to give us complete license, not that we need their license, but it would be helpful to talk about ordination, deacons, priests, structures, everything we want to bring to the table. Invite us, guys. We're here. We'll even pay our own airfares when we're allowed to fly again, or we'll happily do it on Zoom, but invite us. We want to build the church of tomorrow with you. And I don't know anymore what that means, re-ordained roles and re-institutions and hierarchies, but without it, I like your cat's reaction, just to walk across the screen with her bottom in the air. We should do that if we don't get a response.
Yes, I apologise for Kayingo waving her bottom at everybody. It's her way of showing affection and that she'd like to meet you all. She's a very good little leopard usually, but at the moment she's being a little bit naughty. Yes, sorry, I did have a complete train of thought. I think one of the things which really has to stop is the very saccharine view of women and women's roles, which comes out of so much of the dialogue, of the expressions about female roles in the church. I thought John Paul II was bad, and I kind of forgave him that because, you know, here was a chap who'd lost his mum before he was 10. I mean, when you're as small as he was, you do think your mum is the be all and end all, and you do have a very holy view, I suppose, and a very idealized view. And he was born at the end of the Second World War. You know, women did have different roles at that point. So I kind of forgave him that. But then I look at what Pope Francis says about women, and like I said to you, Tina, I just think the man needs to be married for a day, because he's on another planet. He seems to think that women are not bad-tempered, that we never have a short word or a snappy voice. I presume he always thinks that, like 1950s Perfect Wife, we're beautifully made up and have our husband's meal on the table when he comes home. Like any woman on this conversation, if they're not busy screaming, they're probably howling with laughter. That is not the reality. We are all short-tempered, cross, overworked, and we don't want this saccharine model. It's almost as bad as Barbie. I don't know which I'd prefer. Barbie, well, I suppose that's attainable if I want to spend my life in the gym. But this sanctity model really is not.